Hello, my name is Kelly Rossi. I'm one of the project managers here at Microassist. Today I'm going to be giving you a project management webinar entitled How to Get to Tampa, Project Management Principles to Pack for Your Trip. Hopefully lots of you are taking summer road trips and will find all of this incredibly relevant. Before I dive into content today, I'm going to say hello. And I'm going to give you a quick reminder of what I discussed in my last webinar because this is a continuation of a series. In my last webinar, I stated that all projects have a life, as in life cycle, and that should make sense because projects by definition have a beginning and an end. I said that projects have 9 stages in their life cycle and that it was very, very important to understand the first 3, and they were. Stage 1, defining a problem. Stage 2, brainstorming. Stage 3, choosing a solution. I termed these 3 stages life before life because they pertain to the origins of a project rather than what everybody thinks of as project management when they think of project management. When I presented these 3 stages, I outlined a lot of reasons why they're important, and they are important. Here are the reasons why. Self-preservation for the working project manager because we take a lot of heat sometimes as indicated in the photo. Also scope creep because knowing the problem you're trying to solve helps you to stay on point. And working with compassion because it's important to remember that people get stressed during projects and you can help them be less stressed by staying focused. And that brings us up to speed just enough for today. You could probably get the webinar. I assume you could get the webinar that I presented the first time, but that's all you really need for today. Today we're going to be covering the next 3 stages of the project life cycle, and they are Stage 4, define and document your project. Stage 5, intake. And Stage 6, planning. There is a lot that happens during these 3 stages of a project. I could probably do a webinar on each one of the stages individually. So in order for me to stay within my time today, I'm going to do 2 things. The first thing I'm going to do is speak at a very high level in a generalized way. Personally, I manage e-learning projects, but you might not. So I'm going to try to broaden the principles so that anyone can use them and they apply to everyone. The second thing I'm going to do today is I'm going to present the material in a specific structure, and here is that structure. Within each one of those 3 stages I just talked about, I'm going to give you an overview. I'm going to tell you what you need to accomplish in that stage. I'm going to tell you what can help you do it, like tips and tricks. I'm going to talk about pitfalls and protections, and I'm going to tell you what you absolutely have to do in that stage before you leave it. Kind of like when you play Monopoly, you can't pass go, you can't collect $200 before you go around, okay? So if you apply the structure to the stages that I just said, it creates a natural outline, and the outline looks like that. I'll be showing you this outline throughout the talk so that you always know where you are, and I hope that that helps you. Okay, one more thing before I dive in. I just want to remind everyone today that my presentation picks up at stage 4, so it's not a starting point. There were 3 other stages, and they're listed here, that this project should have already gone through. As I cover today's material, I'm working off the assumption that these were done. In other words, the problem you were trying to solve was adequately defined, you thought of all possible solutions, and you chose the most viable one. That's where I'm picking up today. So now, let's dive into stage 4 with the overview. This is the point where we take that solution that we chose in stage 3 and we turn it into a project with the goal being to create or manifest the solution that loops back into the original problem and solves it when we're done. So how do we start? What you want to accomplish here is boxed in orange. You can see where we are on the outline. Think of defining your project as deciding what the project is and what the project is not. Personally, I think of it like a sandbox. I imagine a sandbox in my mind. Anything inside the sandbox is included in the project, and anything outside the sandbox is not. I have a photograph that sums this up perfectly. You see our little project manager here? Not only is she adorable, but she's also smart because she's working inside the sandbox because that's where her project is. All those other things outside the box, like a little playscape back there, that's not her project. To bring it back to my point, you know the solution that you want because you chose it in stage 3. What deliverables need to go into the project to create that solution and make it a reality? How much will those deliverables cost and how long will they take? At a very high level, those are the 3 basic factors in defining a project: deliverables, budget, and timeline. I'm going to talk about those a lot over and over again. Once those are decided, you absolutely must document those details. and you absolutely must get consent on that from all relevant project stakeholders. Everyone's organization is different, so you just have to apply it to your own situation. Who has investment in the project? Who is related to the project and who is relevant? And who would have an interest in your budget and how long it takes? You have to identify those people, and you have to get everyone on the same page before the project starts. That's the driving bottom line. What can help you do that? It often helps to take these three concepts, deliverables, budget, and timeline, and rank them in terms of importance. Every project is different, and sometimes you have to make cuts, just like sometimes you might have to cut something out at home, It's never easy to make cuts, and it's never easy to limit something that you wanted to do, but it is much easier to do that if you have your priorities sorted out and you're clear on that in advance. I think of it like a deck of cards. Again, here comes my imagination. There's a sandbox and there's a deck of cards, okay? Here's the deck of cards. Deliverables, budget, and timeline. Who will be the king, who will be the queen, and who will be the jack. I'm going to explain what I mean by two examples, and the first is something probably most people can relate to, planning a wedding. Anyone who's ever planned a wedding knows that it's most definitely a project. It's a lot of work to plan a wedding these days, but it usually begins with setting a date. When you get engaged, everyone says, when are you getting married? Have you set a date? Have you set a date? So usually a wedding is timeline driven, and timeline is the king, with budget and deliverables taking a back seat. In this particular example, I just randomly chose budget for the queen and deliverables for the jack. That means that you may have to cut some deliverables from your plans because either they won't be ready by your date or your budget can't accommodate them. My second example is a very, very different perspective. Let's say you work for a company that is in the medical field and you're developing a new type of pacemaker. In that case, deliverables are the most important factor. You can't cut back on the outcome because that device is going in someone's chest. It absolutely has to be a certain scope. The deliverables are king. Budget and timeline are taking a back seat. If it takes longer or costs more, that's what's going to happen. You get the idea, I'm sure. So what about you? How would you name your royals in your project? It's important to note that each of these factors are going to influence the other. So you're looking for a balance among them. Not necessarily equality, but balance. And one more tip, the more important the factor is to your project, the more tightly defined it should probably be. For example, if you are on a budget that just cannot move, then you're going to want to spend most of the time on that and checking other things against that budget to make sure that it still holds up. Before I move into pitfalls and protections, I'm going to spend a little more time going into detail on deliverables, budget, timeline, and documentation. Please just note that me doing this makes stage 4 the longest section of my presentation, but I'm not going to go over time because for me, timeline is king. Also, as I give you these quick tips, please don't worry about writing them down. We can send it to you, so you're not going to be able to write it down as quickly as I can say it. So just relax and try to take in what I'm saying, okay? Quick tips on deliverables. Ask yourself which deliverables will contribute to solving the original problem, which are nice to have and what's just not necessary. How will you measure the success of your project and who judges the success? In our wedding example, I would say probably the bride and groom are going to judge the success of the wedding. But in the pacemaker example, is it the patients who judge the success? Is it the doctors? Is it recovery time or how long the device lasts once it's, put in surgically? Is it because it's a lower cost option and more people can afford to get a device where they couldn't get a device before? There's a lot of angles by which an outcome can be judged. That's my point. So try to have clarity on that when you're deciding what is essential and what is nice to have and what will be included and what will not be included. Quick tips for budget. Overall, project cost comes from two places. It comes from the cost of materials and the cost of people's time and expertise. Once you have a sense of what deliverables you're going to be creating, you're going to have to get information on how they're created, who creates them, and how much that costs. You're going to need information. People who perform the kind of work you need done can provide tons of information. For example, do you need graphic art done? You're going to probably have to talk to graphic artists and see how much they charge for their work and just get a sense of that. You have to probably create a spreadsheet and keep a spreadsheet. I literally keep track of all my project budgets in Excel, on an Excel spreadsheet, and it works just fine for me, so you don't have to spend $1 billion getting software. unless you need that for your purposes. I don't, so Excel works fine for me. Make sure that you include contingency in your budget just in case something is more expensive than you thought. Just like in life, budgets sometimes have unexpected costs. Quick tips for timeline. Again, just like with cost, you're going to consider how the deliverables are made and who does that kind of work. Something I like to try to do at this point is create a loose project plan with all the steps, because it very much helps me to be literal and sit down and think through the steps of how something is created. So for sure someone does this, then they do that, then they do that. It helps me identify gaps in my knowledge, and that actually is a little scary but very helpful. So when creating a timeline, you also want to remember to include time for reviews and approvals. If there's any sort of legal department or policy department that has to review deliverables, that is absolutely going to impact your timeline. If you have more people who need to review deliverables, that's going to impact your timeline because it takes more time to get it circulated around to all those people, okay? And just like with your budget, you're also going to need contingency in case something takes longer than you thought. Costs more, takes longer, right? And then also with timeline, you're going to want to ask the magic question. And yes, there's a magic question. If you were sleeping, perk up because there's a magic question, and here it is. How is the effort that you're giving me effort or duration? Okay, they're very different. Effort is the number of hours, man hours, human hours that it takes to do a task, whereas duration is the length of time that elapses before a task is done. I know it sounds like I just said exactly the same thing in different words, but I didn't. I will explain by examples. You can see the picture of the dishes here. At my house, it takes me 30 minutes to do a load of dishes. That's me in the suds standing at the sink. But a whole day, or probably more than a day, will elapse before I get to do those dishes because look at all the other stuff I have to do. I get up, I got to make breakfast, I got to feed Grumpy the cat, I got to go to work, I got to help the child with homework, I have to do laundry, and then I can get to the dishes. That's duration. So you can see they're very, very different. Just because somebody says they can do something in a day doesn't mean you're going to have it tomorrow. And that's the big difference between effort and duration. When you're getting information from people on how long things take to do, make sure that you're just clarifying. None is right and none is wrong, but just make sure you're clear on what they mean. So when you're going through that, just make sure you remember our little friend here, popping out of the hat saying, hey, is that effort or duration? Just remember what the bunny tells you to do. You'll be fine. All right, quick tips for documenting. Please document all your decisions for each of the three elements, deliverables, budget, and timeline, in a single place, not a bunch of emails in your inbox. That's not where they belong. That's not where they need to be. Please confirm in writing that there is consensus on all of this information. Include the highest ranking person possible. Again, just like with the term relevant project stakeholder, you're going to have to identify who's a high-ranking person who has influence over this project. It's kind of always important to have them in the back of your mind. If you have created anything that's an estimate, like I made a tentative timeline, I'm not really sure, this is an estimate, put estimate on the documentation because you don't want someone turning to you in a meeting weeks later going, you said you could have this done in 6 months. It says it right here on this paper. Well, that was an estimate. So just put estimate on estimates. Also, don't skip documenting the project and don't skip consent. Which brings me to the next section, pitfalls and protections. I bet everyone is wondering, I like to imagine that everyone in the world is just dying to know why I named the title of the presentation about a road trip to Tampa for a project management webinar. Doesn't make any sense. It comes from the following idea. Agreeing on what the project is and what the project is not before the project starts is critical. If you don't, you may as well take a road trip to Tampa, pick up people on the way, let them argue about what your destination actually should be, all the while you're trying to drive to Tampa, which is almost certainly where you won't wind up. Think that's crazy? I'm used to that. That's fine. Let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, because we're going crazy today, that the project sponsor gets promoted, she leaves the department, and she leaves your project. Look how happy she looks. She's so excited. She worked so hard. She got promoted. She deserves it. But you're the little stress baby here saying you're leaving me because she was the one person who was anchoring the project. She was the one person everybody went to and asked their questions, and they took her word for it, and now she's gone. So your project now is kind of rudderless, right? Let's suppose that you get a new boss and he has so many new ideas about the project that you're midway on. Now, for a project manager, the word midway has special meaning. When I hear midway, I think I only have half of my budget left. I only have half of my time left, right? And if someone comes in from the side and wants to change things and you only have half of your resources left, that is a problem. You are the stress baby. This is my favorite one. You have someone on your project who has a lot of opinions, really loud opinions, and they just know what the project should include. We should do this, we should do that, we should do this. And they're always kind of swirling it around, right? And then you just want to know when the meeting's going to end. I do. Confess it right here. But if you defined your project and you documented all that and you got consensus from everyone, including the highest ranking person possible, read new boss, you could keep the project stable without getting into a power struggle with anybody at all, because it would just be the project. Here's the bottom line. It should never be a matter of opinion what the project is and what the project is not. It should not be subjective. That's my opinion, that it shouldn't be a matter of opinion, okay? That's the number one pitfall on the stage. There's not a plane that leaves a gate at any airport without knowing what it's destined for, right? We don't just push from the gate and go, well, we could go to Tampa, we could fly to Florida, we could fly to Chicago, we could fly. Every plane knows where it's going before it pushes from the gate. Would you pay money to be on a plane that you didn't know where it was headed for? Why would you spend thousands of dollars on a project if you didn't know where it was trying to head for? It's the same thing to me, but I'm full of opinions, I guess. Project documentation is not a collection of emails in your inbox. That's just not, don't do that. Personally, I work off statements of work, but if that's too much for your situation, it's too fancy, it's too heavy for your situation, a single document in Word will work just fine, as long as it's comprehensive, specific, and has garnered consent from the right people. A budget with no contingency is not your friend. A timeline with no contingency is not your friend, okay? And finally, this stage is painful for people who just want to dive in. They want to fast track. We just want to get this project going, boom, boom, boom. But don't allow yourself to be rushed out of the stage. Starting a project without knowing what the project is crazy. And fast tracking crazy is crazier. Again, in my opinion. Please don't leave the stage until the project is defined, cohesively documented in writing, and approved by those with authority to do so. This may encompass a budget and a timeline. Probably will, probably should, right? If so, they should both contain contingency. And here is the last gut check before you want to leave the station. Are you sure that the deliverables that you chose contribute to solving the original problem that you defined in stage 1? That's stage 4. Next one, intake, otherwise known as congratulations, you are the project manager. I look like this. I am wearing an evening gown and a tiara presenting this webinar to you right now. I look fabulous, and I woke up that way. Anyway, the overview of this stage is that a project is being handed to you officially. It's time for you to get oriented to the point where you can plan and manage it from here. You're going to get your arms around it, and you're going to take it from here. Now, here's a question. Were you around in stage 4 when the project was being defined? If you were, then you probably look like this guy at the top. You're probably a little ragged, a little tired. You've experienced some things. And you're just going to ask a few questions just to make sure you understand the project as it is now. Maybe a little time elapsed between defining it and actually kicking it off. You're just going to make sure everything is the way you understood it. If you were not around in stage 4 when the project was being defined, you're going to look all fresh and happy, like this guy at the bottom. They're going to say, hey, I have a project that I want you to manage. You're going to go, what? That's awesome. You're going to look happy like this guy. But you're going to ask tons of questions. Look at all the question marks, because you are just getting your arms around the project. You're not familiar with it. You may have heard of it down the hall, but you actually need to get to the point where you can manage it. You're going to ask tons of questions. That is intake. You're taking that project in. What you want to accomplish here and what can help you do it, I combine these two sections. There's 2 things that I would really like you to do in this stage. And the first is, probably you guessed this, find out everything you can about this project. Read any and all documents from stage 4. I'm talking about contracts, statements of work, questionnaires, budgets, any emails that people will share with you. Please do not steal emails on my behalf. Talk to the people who were around when the project was being scoped. compare information from different sources, draw conclusions, and ask questions. If the statement of work says one thing and Bob says another, and he was around when the project was being scoped, find out what the real answer is, okay? Again, the project, it shouldn't be subjective, right? It shouldn't be a matter of opinion. The statement of work shouldn't have one opinion and Bob have another. Should all be on the same page, right? If you have a billion deliverables on a statement of work and your budget is skinny mini, well, why? Where's the money going to come from for all these deliverables? Are some of the deliverables being donated? Are they being repurposed from another project? Is there a robbery that's going to take place later? We're going to steal deliverables? I don't know. What's the plan? Some way or another, it has to be reconciled. Why have so many deliverables in a tiny little budget? Okay. And it's really, at this stage, it's really not okay. And it can be hard to do these things because you're kind of pressing people for answers and having them explain things to you. But it's really not okay for you to kind of turn the other cheek and go, well, I wasn't around when it was being scoped, so, I'm just going to do my best. That's like an airline pilot going, well, I wasn't around when they built the plane, so I'm going to do my best to fly, and I hope everyone understands. That's really not okay. It's your project, and you're flying, so you've got to steer it, and you have to get it there safely, so you absolutely need to get the information and just make sure you're pleasantly aggressive about it. Pleasantly aggressive. All right. The other thing, I said there were two things. The second thing that you need to do is you absolutely need to be introduced as the project manager by someone with authority to do so. When I was a kid, there was this boy on my street. He'd say, "You're not the boss of me." And you know what? He's right. I'm all grown up and I'm still the boss of absolutely no one. So how do I manage projects and have people do things on my projects if I'm not the boss of them and I have no authority? I borrow it. I borrow authority. How do I borrow authority? Well, for me personally, my title gives me some authority. People see me coming and they're like, oh, there's the project manager. If I show up in your door, oh, there's the project manager. If I ask you when you're going to have that done by, well, she's the project manager. It's just kind of assumed and known why I'm asking that. But what if you don't have that? What if your job title is, admin assistant 4 and you don't have the scary title that I have? That's okay. You can still handle that. All you need to do is ask the project sponsor to hold a kickoff meeting where the project is introduced to the team, you are introduced as the acting project manager, and the team's support is solicited by the sponsor, not by you. If holding a meeting is just overkill for your situation, that's fine. Your project sponsor can send an email to the team, CCing you with the same basic points. Again, not from you. You can't crown yourself. You have to be knighted, especially if you're not a project manager by trade. Before I leave this point, I'm going to put everybody here on drama alert, okay? If you look around the table at your project team and you notice that it's made up of your peers, people at the same hierarchy level as you, then this introduction that I'm talking about, whether by meeting or email, is very, very, very important, because if you don't have it and it's not crystal clear to the team that the power's not coming from you, that you've been just asked to manage a project, you're gonna have drama. And the drama's gonna sound like this. Who does she think she is coming in here and telling me I need to have that done by Friday? Who does he think he is telling me that I need to be further along and that I'm making the project late? It needs to be made clear to the team that any authority you have is not necessarily coming from you. You've been asked to manage a project. You're going to do things in that regard, period. You're not going to be the boss of them. It just breeds resentment. So please make sure that introduction happens and that you're not appointing yourself. You have to borrow the authority. You have to be given the authority, okay? If you have this drama, it wastes so much time and so much energy. It takes from the project. It takes from you. It's a drag. There's nothing fun about it. So please avoid all that toxic drama. The introduction is simple and the consequences are just not fun at all. So pitfalls and protections. If there was any length of time between now and the defining stage, just make sure you're familiar with the project as it stands now. Don't assume that nothing changed. Make sure. With all the questions you're going to be asking, stakeholders might get frustrated with you because sometimes it's because you're pointing out things or discovering things that they didn't think of when they were defining the project, and everyone loves to have their mistakes pointed out to them. The second thing is that sometimes people just want to start right now. They want to fast track. They just want to go. They don't understand why you're asking all these questions. You're holding everything up. Try to hold your ground long enough to do a proper intake, because you're going to be responsible for all these details, whether you do a proper intake or not. They're going to turn to you in that meeting and go, you're supposed to have this, whether you did a good intake or not. At this point, if you're being asked to move forward with a project that was not defined and documented, it's going to be rough. I'm just going to tell you right now, everyone has a job and everyone has a boss, and sometimes we have to work in conditions that are not optimal. The big boss says, no, you just start now. We'll figure it out later. If that happens to you, it's going to be rough, and you just need to know ahead of time it's probably going to be rough. I would try as much as I could to get it documented, even if I had to write up something myself and get it approved, just some kind of stake in the ground that I could build upon. And if that can't happen, then you're going to remember the concept of self-preservation. I talked about that in my last webinar. You're just going to try to take care of yourself as best you can. You're going to employ a lot of patience. You're going to avoid taking things personally. You're going to keep yourself and your project moving forward as best you can. And if you're in that situation, it's not ideal, and I hope no one ever gets into that situation. That's a big pitfall. Unfortunately, it does happen. All right. Don't leave this stage until you're provided with the necessary documents, you're allowed to ask questions, you've compared the sources, you get answers, and you are introduced to the team as the acting project manager, because we want to avoid all that toxic drama. And that leaves me with the last stage I'm going to talk about today, which is planning your project. Now that you know the project goals and the deliverables and the budget and the timeline, it's time to plan your project. Here's where we are in our outline. We're on 6A, okay? Sometimes people ask me, what's the difference between defining and planning? Defining states the what and planning states the how. As in, defining, we're going to take a road trip to Tampa. Planning, we're going to leave on this date. We're going to take a rental car. We're going to take this road. This is who's driving. This is who's paying, etc., etc., okay? So we're going to talk about project planning in this stage. We're also going to talk about project risk and a communication plan, okay? What you want to accomplish here and what can help you do it. I combine these two sections here. One thing you're going to do in the planning stage is create a project plan. A project plan is a timeline, but it's extremely detailed, right down to the individual tasks, who's going to perform each task, and when. This becomes the official schedule for the project. If you've never created one, they can be very intimidating to do, but you don't have to be intimidated, and I'm confident that each and every one of you can make a good project plan. All you have to do is start with the deliverables. Remember, we decided which deliverables go in our sandbox and which don't. So you've got some deliverables in your sandbox, and you start with those. Just list them out, because every project at its heart is made of deliverables. You're going to do something, you're going to make something, you're going to create something, and those creations feed into what we call a project. So just break it down by deliverable. Now I want you to look at each one of the deliverables and start thinking, which tasks do I need to perform in order to create that deliverable? Okay, because at its heart, every deliverable is made of tasks. You're going to do things to create a deliverable. The deliverables create a project. The tasks, I like them to be specific and actionable, like create a specification document or purchase supplies. Even if it's simple, I like to have a verb in there. It's okay that these tasks here are not in order. I'm sure you kind of notice that they're kind of unordered. That's fine, because putting tasks in order takes some time to do, and I like to try to do it only one time. I'd rather have all the tasks kind of listed out, maybe some are in order, maybe some aren't, before I try to put them in order, because that takes some time for me. Once you have all the tasks, you want to start putting them in order. You want to start considering what should be done first, second, third, and the relationships between the tasks. I'll explain what I mean. You can see deliverable 1 here. Task 1, 2, 3, 4. It's linear. I can't do 2 until 1 is done. I can't do 3 until 2 is done. But under deliverable 2, task 5 is holding up tasks 6 and 7. Okay, if task 5 doesn't get done, it delays 2 tasks, and actually it delays 3. It delays 6 and 7, and then, kind of cascading down, it also delays 8. If you look at deliverable 3, both task 9 and 10 need to be done before 11 can be done. So if 10 comes off without a hitch, that's great. But if there's a delay on 9, that's going to bump down to 11, and that's going to bump down to 12. You can see how the relationship between the tasks would impact how long it is, the duration before things are done. So you want to start considering the relationships between the tasks and what pushes and pulls other tasks. Now you want to consider who can do the tasks, who has the skill sets, okay? Can we afford them? Are they available? On this chart I wrote some examples. On task 1, for example, both Bob and Ellen have the skill set to do this task, but Ellen isn't available, so we chose Bob. And that, after that, you want to consider how long each task will take. You want to make sure you're clarifying between effort and duration. Remember that dishwashing example, okay? Neither is right or wrong. You just make sure that you're talking in the same language, okay? And from there, you build out your project plan for your specific situation. So that's the basic method for building a project plan. Now I'm going to talk very briefly about project risk. This elephant is at tremendous risk. All projects have risk, just like our friend the elephant. So a risk plan is very helpful. Here's how you create one. Again, I'm moving, it says at the bottom, don't worry about writing this down. You're going to give yourself carpal tunnel. I'm just going to walk through it quickly and then I'll go through it with an example. The first thing that you want to do is you want to just list all the risks you can think of for your project, and you want to focus on your king, right? Was it timeline, budget, deliverables, right? For example, if you're on a budget, that's king, and it cannot move, I would spend extra time trying to brainstorm and think about risks that could happen for my budget because it's so important. It just kind of can't fail. So list all the risks and focus on your king. The second thing you want to do is ask yourself, with each risk, how likely is this risk to happen, and how destructive or bad would it be if it did happen? Any risk that is likely and destructive goes to the top of your attention list. That's something that's flagged. The third thing that you want to do is, with your top risks that you identified, how will I respond to that risk, and what triggers me to respond? Okay, I just threw a lot at you, so I'm going to go through one more time using our friendly example of our wedding. We said that timeline is the king. What risks could threaten the timeline? What could you not be without on that day? I would say most brides would agree that they can't be without a wedding gown on the day. Now I realize a wedding gown is a deliverable, but it has to fit within the timeline because the timeline is king. And I think most brides would agree that not having a wedding gown is a little bit of a showstopper. So suppose that you are a bride and you're shopping for a wedding gown, and you find a gown that you love, but it can't be ready till very close to your wedding day. It's cutting it close. Maybe you want to avoid that risk altogether and just pick a different gown that can be ready sooner. Or you could order the risky gown and pay an extra fee to have it rushed if that becomes an issue down the line. If it gets too close, you call and you go, hey, I need to have this rushed. You're almost there with mitigating this risk, but not quite. You still need to decide what will trigger you to have the dress rushed, and there needs to be agreement on the response. In our wedding gown example, we can decide that if the gown isn't here 1 month before the wedding, I'm going to pick up the phone that day, I'm going to call the dress company, I'm going to say I need my dress rushed, and I'm going to agree to pay the extra fee. I just mitigated that risk, and there's a trigger, a specific trigger that makes me do that. But what if you roll around to that day and your dad doesn't want to pay the fee? Your dad's paying for the wedding. He's like, I'm not paying $400 more for you to have that dress. I already paid a fortune, blah, 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 blah. My point is not just family dynamics, but when the time comes for you to be pulling the trigger on a risk response to mitigate a risk that's coming at you, you don't want to be squabbling. You want to be acting. So you want to agree not just on a trigger in advance, but make sure there's consensus and agreement on the response in advance. So you just go right into a solution. And that's risk. Next, I'm going to talk very briefly about communication plans because I think it's something that you can pretty easily do once you know the concept and just apply it to your own situation. As a project manager, you're the circle. By the way, a lot of information is going to be flowing to you and through you and from you, so it helps to define those lines of communication, you guessed it, in advance. For example, what kinds of information do you need from your team? That graphic artist we hired, or the person who's creating code. What kind of information do you need from your team? How often do you need it? Do you need it daily? Do you need it weekly? Do you expect a knock on your door if something urgent happens? And what's urgent? Do they understand that it's urgent or not? Same goes for the other way. What about your boss or your stakeholders, people who are maybe paying for the project? How often do they need information? Do they need all the nitty-gritty details, or do they just want a high-level report? There's probably two kinds of bosses. One boss that you give a high-level report and they say, you're not giving me any details. And the other kind of boss that you give them all the details and they're like, you're tiring me with all these details. I just want high level. So definitely have two different kinds. What kind of information do they want? My point is that you want to plan out how you're going to communicate. Are you going to meet? Are you going to have an email? Etc., etc. You want to plan all that out. Don't forget to include yourself in that plan, and just make sure that everyone's on board with the way you're going to be receiving information and expecting it and giving it back away. You're the circle in this picture. I think you can apply that to your own situation pretty intuitively. And look where we are in our outline. We are so far ahead. We're nearly done, and all we have to do now is just push on to our pitfalls. You want to take care to include the final steps in your project plan, like going live or delivering source files. Also, you want to cross-check your project plan with the project documentation, like a statement of work, for example, to make sure that the project plan reflects the statement of work accurately. You don't want to put anything in the project plan that isn't in the statement of work, because then you'd create deliverables you're not supposed to. And you also don't want to leave any deliverables out of your project plan that are in your statement of work, because then you'd be coming up short. So make sure they mirror each other one-to-one. You also want to cross-check your project plan against your budget or your timeline to confirm there is enough money and or time to do all the tasks. Now, it's true, you might have to go back to the drawing board if you do that check and you're like, I have 1 million deliverables and I have a skinny mini budget, like what I talked about before. You might have to go back to the drawing board with that budget, and you might have to go back to the drawing board with the deliverables, but you may as well do it now, because if you don't do it now, it's going to happen at a worse time. So before you get into while you're planning and you start realizing all the tasks that need to be done, just do a sanity check on it and just make sure. Does anyone need to approve your project plan? Is there any one person on your project plan who's responsible for most of the tasks? If you look at all your tasks and it's like Jim's doing that, Jim's a risk. What if Jim gets the flu? What if Jim quits? What if Jim moves to Boca Raton? You know, that project sponsor left and you were the stress baby. Remember, things change. So if it's Jim, all the way down, Jim's a risk. You might want to cross-train somebody to know how to do what Jim does, like an understudy for a play. And one last thing is to know that risk can come from all different sources, even things that are not related to your project, like Jim. It can come from a computer infrastructure going down, like a crash, right? It can come from a decision maker who was very gung-ho and now has other priorities and is no longer interested in making decisions, and they cause problems in your project. Risk can even come from the sky. I like to scare people by saying that. But what I mean is that, for example, I know a company in Florida, of course, because the presentation's all about Florida, and they include a hurricane season in their risk plans. In the Atlantic, it's June 1st through November 30th. So sometimes they have to evacuate, and they put that in their risk plans because that's a reality of life where they live. So that's not related to the project. Okay, I'm not saying you need to make a risk plan for every thunderstorm that comes along, but just try to think outside the box and not just think about what's involved in your project per se, because risk can come from anywhere sometimes. Please don't leave the stage until you've created a project plan that was cross-checked with the documentation, like a statement of work and a budget and or timeline. Please don't leave before you created a risk plan and got consent to execute the responses. We need to make sure Dad's okay with paying for that dress rush fee. Also, please don't leave until you create a communication plan and you make sure that everyone's on the same page with the things you've created and that they have access to them. You made it. You made it all the way through. I hope that this was helpful for you, especially all you non-project manager type people out there who don't have the scary title that I have. I hope it was helpful, and I would be happy to take any questions that anyone might have.